Today's lesson is Poles Apart, exploring Earth's frozen frontiers. Hi, everybody. I am Roger.
Hello, everybody. I am Shane.
And today, Shane and myself are going to be talking about the poles, the North Pole and the South Pole, which seems rather appropriate because in just a couple of weeks, I should say, a big fat fella in a red suit and a white beard is going to fly down from the North Pole.
That's right.
And give presents to all the good little kids. I suppose that's the reason why we're talking about the poles in today's lesson. But we're not just talking about the North Pole, we're talking about the South Pole as well.
That's right. We've got two different poles, and we are exploring Earth's frozen frontiers. Now, a frontier is kind of a land that is remote and that you would find away from a city. And it's usually a place that you will go to explore because there is not much going on there.
A frontier is kind of like a border, basically, but then beyond that, you don't really know what's there. It's kind of like a wilderness. It's kind of like a wild area. And that's how we're describing the polar regions of the world. Once you run out of land, then you have to go to these polar areas, and they're frozen. They're really cold, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's get to it. Let's talk about poles apart, the North Pole and the South Pole. Let's listen to the first part of our lesson right now.
Poles Apart, exploring Earth's frozen frontiers. Icebound and shaped by extreme cold, the Arctic and Antarctic are two of the most remote and mysterious places on Earth. The two polar regions offer an intriguing look at survival in nature's harshest environments.
大家好，标题中介绍名词 frontier， 它的意思是国境、边疆，也可以是探索活动等的新领域。例如 The explorers set out on a journey to the African continent's eastern frontier. 探险家们踏上了前往非洲大陆东部边境旅程。或者 Recent discoveries have expanded the frontiers of physics and astronomy. 近期的发现为物理学及天文学拓展了新领域。下一个看到形容词 mysterious， 表示神秘的或是难以理解的。例如The old house at the end of the street has a mysterious aura. 街尾的老房子有一种神秘的氛围。或是 Ever since she was a child, Valerie had found the forest strange and mysterious. Valerie 从小就觉得森林陌生又神秘。继续看到形容词 polar， 它的意思是两极的、极地的，但也可以是完全相反的意思。例如 This explorer wants to visit the polar regions of the planet. 这位探险家想要造访地球的极地区域。也可以说 People living in polar regions must be able to cope with freezing temperatures. 生存在极地的人必须能抵抗严寒气温。再来介绍形容词 harsh， 表示恶劣的或是严峻的，也可以是残酷的。可以说 The harsh environment of the Amazon makes it a risky place for travelers to explore. 亚马逊恶劣的环境使之成为游客探索的危险之境。又或者说 John's teacher gave him a harsh punishment after he was rude to her. John 对老师不礼貌，老师便对他严厉惩罚。
Okay, so again, we're talking about the polar regions of the Earth. If something's polar, it's at the extreme. It's at one side or another. I should mention in the title there, we've got the term poles apart. We sometimes use that to describe things that are extremely different from each other.
Right.
Like John and Mary's personalities are poles apart. They're completely different people. John is outgoing and likes to make friends, whereas Mary is kind of shy and antisocial. And yeah, so they're poles apart. They're like opposites.
Right. Okay. So let's get into the reading here. Icebound and shaped by extreme cold, the Arctic and Antarctic are two of the most remote and mysterious places on Earth. Now, when we say something is icebound, that means that it's just covered in ice. And we see here that it's extremely cold and remote and mysterious. So when we say something is mysterious, It is full of mystery. We don't know much about it. It can be quite intriguing and maybe sometimes even a little bit scary.
Right, so these polar regions are icebound. They are covered by ice all the time, and they're mysterious. We don't know a lot about them, and therefore we're going to be talking about these polar regions in today's lesson. Now, the two polar regions offer an intriguing look at survival in nature's harshest environments. Okay, so polar here is the word we're using to describe the poles. It's an adjective if we talk about areas that are at the extreme ends of a place. In this particular case, the extreme north and the extreme south of the world. Those are the polar regions. And of course, you have the North Pole and the South Pole. And if you look at them, you can get an intriguing look at survival. Okay, if something's intriguing, it's very interesting, and you want to learn more about it. Hey, I met this guy last week. He seems like a very interesting person. He's traveled to lots of countries. He's a very intriguing person. I'd like to get together with him again and have a long conversation. I could probably learn a lot from him.
Right, okay, and we're looking at survival in nature's harshest environments. Now, when we say an environment is harsh, that means that it is very inhospitable. It's not very comfortable. So if you are in a harsh environment, you can imagine it being very hot, or in this case, extremely cold. So it won't be easy to live in, and it will make life difficult for you.
Right, of course, it's difficult to imagine anything that can survive in these frozen places, but they do, and that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be taking an intriguing look at survival in these harsh areas of the world. Let's move on now to the second part, and we'll go to the North Pole, we'll go to the Arctic Ocean. Let's find out what this is all about.
The Arctic consists of the northernmost parts of Europe, Asia, and North America, along with the ice-covered Arctic Ocean. At its heart lies the North Pole, although the pole is unmarked due to the constantly shifting ice sheet. The Arctic experiences bitter winters, characterized by months of darkness and temperatures as low as minus 68 degrees Celsius. In contrast, summer brings 24-hour sunlight and temperatures averaging around 10 degrees Celsius. Despite its tough environment, the Arctic supports plenty of wildlife. Iconic land animals include polar bears and Arctic foxes, while the waters are alive with whales, seals, and walruses. Humans, too, have adapted to the punishing conditions. Over thousands of years, indigenous peoples have developed impressive survival strategies, and today, the Arctic has over 4 million residents.
第二部分看到动词 characterize， 表示具有点点点特征，或是描述点点点的特性。例如 Honesty and great customer service characterize the international company. 诚信和完善的顾客服务是这家国际公司的特色。再看一个例子 Milton objected when Molly characterized him as selfish and greedy. Milton 对 Molly 把他描述成自私又贪婪表示反对。再来介绍形容词 indigenous， 指的是土生土长的或是本土的、当地的。举例来说 On her trip to Australia, Katie visited some indigenous people. Katie 去澳洲玩时拜访了一些原住民。或是 The disease wiped out most of the area's indigenous population. 这种疾病灭绝了该地区大部分的原住民人口。接着看到名词 resident， 表示居民。例如 In a small town like this one, all of the residents know one another. 在这样的小镇里，所有居民都彼此认识。也可以说 As a long-time resident of the town, Cheryl actively participates in the planning of various local events. 身为这个城镇的长期居民 Cheryl 积极参与当地各个活动的筹划。
Okay, so if you refer to the north part of the world, the part that's north of Russia and north of Canada, that's the Arctic. Sometimes you can say Arctic. You can hear the C in there, but a lot of people just kind of skip over the C and they say
do,
Arctic. Yeah, the Arctic region. And that, of course, refers to the area around the North Pole.
Yeah, so the Arctic consists of the northernmost parts of Europe, Asia, and North America, along with the ice-covered Arctic Ocean. So we say that it consists of, that just means it's made up of. And the northernmost parts of Europe, just meaning these parts that are at the furthest north part of these areas of Europe and Asia and North America. So you're not going to find them in the south of any of these areas. They're just going to be further north, where typically it gets colder and colder the further north you go.
Right, so here we've got the phrase to consist of. That just means all these smaller things are together to make one whole. I could say, for example, Central America consists of Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Costa Rica, Panama. I hope I didn't leave any country out there, but yes, Central America consists of those various countries. And yes, indeed, the Arctic consists of the northern parts of Europe, like Sweden, Finland, and Norway. We've also got Asia, which would be Siberia, and North America, which of course would be Alaska, and Canada, and also Greenland, which I believe is part of Denmark. And so those things constitute or consist of or make up the northernmost parts of those areas. It makes up the Arctic.
Right. At its heart lies the North Pole, although the pole is unmarked due to the constantly shifting ice sheet. So we say here, at its heart lies the North Pole. So when we look in our body, we think of the middle of our body as the heart. So the heart just meaning the middle part of this. That is where we will see the North Pole.
Right, like here in Taiwan, Puli is in the heart of Taiwan, for example. So in the middle of the Arctic region is the North Pole, but it's unmarked, okay, because it's a big ice sheet that's constantly shifting, constantly moving, and so you can't just pound a pole into the ice there and expect it to stay there. It keeps on moving because of that naughty ice there. But I think you can do that down in Antarctica because it's land down there.
So continuing along, the Arctic experiences bitter winters characterized by months of darkness and temperatures as low as minus 68 degrees Celsius. Now that is cold. So it experiences these bitter winters. If we describe something as bitter, we just mean that it is not sweet or pleasant. So you can imagine a winter being bitter, just meaning that it's going to be extremely unpleasant. Very cold. Being characterized by months of darkness just means that when we think of this place, we think of it as one of the main qualities is that it is covered by months of darkness.
Right. To characterize, of course, it means you point out the distinctive features of something. For example, I could say, historians often characterize the 1960s as a time of great change. So here, of course, the winters are characterized by these long months of darkness. So I guess after October or November, it just turns totally dark there in the North Pole. And if you live in Alaska, for example, you just got to get used to the idea that it's going to be nighttime all the time. There might be a little light in the sky, maybe in the afternoon, but the sun will never rise. So yes, you've got all this darkness there, and it can get really cold.
Minus 68 degrees Celsius.
I can't even imagine that.
I cannot imagine that. In contrast, summer brings 24-hour sunlight and temperatures averaging around 10 degrees Celsius. All right, so 10 degrees Celsius, okay, that's doable. As long as you have a jacket on and you're dressed relatively warm, that's not too cold. And we've got sunlight 24 hours a day. So it does not get dark at night, which to me, I don't know about you, but that would just be really weird.
I suppose if you live there, you get used to it. But yeah, during the winter, you have months of darkness. And then the opposite, or in contrast, during the summer, Hi, the sun is up all the time. Imagine trying to sleep at night and it's 1 in the morning and the sun is still high in the sky, or probably not very high, probably very close to the horizon, but still it would be kind of strange. And it would be a little warmer during that time, although not as warm as Taiwan.
Not as warm as Taiwan. 10 degrees Celsius is still pretty cold by Taiwan standards.
Okay, moving on now to the next paragraph. It says, despite its tough environment, even though it has this harsh environment, the Arctic supports plenty of wildlife. So you might be surprised. It's really cold there and it gets dark all year, or at least during the winter. Still, there's lots of wildlife that lives there. For example, iconic land animals include polar bears and Arctic foxes, while the waters are alive with whales, seals, and walruses. So these are some examples of the wildlife that you can expect to see in this part of the world. You've got polar bears, those white bears, and Arctic foxes. I think those are foxes whose fur turns white.
They are just the cutest, those things.
They certainly are.
Right.
And a walrus, of course, is like a big seal with long tusks like an elephant.
Right.
And humans, too, have adapted to the punishing conditions. So they've gotten used to these conditions there. Over thousands of years, indigenous peoples have developed impressive survival strategies, and today the Arctic has over 4 million residents. So we've got indigenous people there. Those are people that have lived there since the beginning or for a long time, like the Inuit or the Eskimos or whatever. They've lived there a long time, and they have learned how to survive. They have these different strategies that they use in order to survive.
Yes, and going back to iconic, when we say something's iconic, we mean that it is a symbol or something that you think of actually quite famous. So these iconic land animals, when we think of an Arctic fox or we think of the polar bears, we will say that they are iconic, just meaning that they're quite famous.
Right, so like the Louvre Museum or Notre Dame or the Eiffel Tower, those are iconic of Paris. And
iconic landmarks.
Exactly. And these animals are iconic of the Arctic there. Polar bears, Arctic foxes, walruses, seals. You get the idea. And again, humans have adopted to the punishing conditions, the harsh conditions, and they have developed these impressive survival strategies. And lots of people still live there. It still has over 4 million residents. Imagine that all those people are still living in this cold part of the world.
Right, yeah. So you could also say a resident is someone who resides somewhere. To reside just means to live. So we have 4 million people who live there.
Right. I could say, I'm from the United States, but I'm a resident of Taiwan, as are you, Shane.
I am as well a resident here in Taipei.
Okay, we're at the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's wrap things up in the third part. Let's listen first.
While the Arctic is largely desolate, it boasts considerable resources, from fish and forests to precious metals. As climate change opens new opportunities, this wealth is increasingly sought after, bringing new challenges for the Arctic's ecosystem.
第三部分看到名词 ecosystem 表示生态系统，可以说 The coral reef is an important part of the marine ecosystem. 珊瑚礁是海洋生态系统重要的一部分。最后一个例子 Protecting the ecosystem is crucial for preserving biodiversity and ensuring a sustainable future. 保护生态系统对保育生态多样性和确保永续未来至关重要。
Okay, now here it says, while the Arctic is largely desolate, even though it is very desolate, it still boasts considerable resources, and we've got a range of those resources, from fish and forests to precious metals. So even though this place is kind of like a desert, that's what desolate means here. It's kind of like a desert. It's just kind of empty. There's really nothing there.
No people.
No people, not a lot of wildlife.
Right.
It's quite desolate, like the Sahara Desert is quite desolate. There's not really much there. But even though it is desolate, even though it's kind of like a desert, it boasts, or it has these things has these resources, which it's proud of. It has fish, which you can eat. You've got forests, where you can probably find some wood to build your house. And also it's got precious metals. Metal is kind of a material that's used in various applications, like magnesium and iron and platinum. And those are all different kinds of metals.
Gold being a pretty famous and useful one.
Indeed. So those are precious metals that you can find in this area. And as climate change opens new opportunities, this wealth is increasingly sought after, bringing new challenges for the Arctic's ecosystem. So we've got climate change, and it's making things warmer up north there. So we've got new opportunities. Lots of people are moving up there, looking to exploit the resources of the area. So this is wealth here, the fish, the forest, the metals. This place is sought after. Here, sought is the past tense of the word to seek, which means to look after, or to look.
To try and find.
To look for, to try and find, indeed. And if something's sought after, a lot of people want that thing. It is very popular.
Yes, right. And we can imagine with climate change, what's happening is a lot of this ice is melting, giving way to land and rocks where you might be able to get at some of these precious metals. But, of course, this is bringing new challenges for the Arctic's ecosystem. And an ecosystem is just the system of the ecology that you have in a particular area, all the plants and animals and things that make up an area is called an ecosystem. And you can imagine if they're starting to drill and they're starting to build mines and able to extract some of these precious metals, that is going to cause some destruction to the environment.
Right, so they need to take some measures to protect the environment from those big, powerful national powers that are going up there to try to exploit the area. Okay, we're at the end of our discussion for today. Let's listen now to Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第二部分提到北极包括欧洲、亚洲和北美洲的最北部的地区，以及冰雪覆盖的北冰洋。那文中是用 along with 来表达以及。那我们来整理一下这个片语介系词 along with 的用法。首先第一个就是课文用法去表达连同、以及或者是和什么什么一起。例如 Mark started a new business along with his brothers. Mark 和他的兄弟们一起创业。那特别注意，当我们用 A along with B 来当主词的时候，动词要随着 A 做变化哦。像是 Susan along with her parents is traveling to Europe next month. Susan 以及她爸妈下个月要去欧洲旅游。那注意我们这边用到 is 是配合 Susan 这个主词。好，再来看到第二个用法 along with 可以表达除了什么什么之外还有，意思相当于 in addition to还有 besides。 举例来说 Along with the dress, she also bought a scarf. 除了洋装之外，她还买了一条围巾。好，那么课文接着写到说 At its heart lies the North Pole. 其中心为北极。那句子里面这个 at its heart 这是地方副词片语， lies 是动词， The North Pole 是主词。那这是把地方副词片语移到句首的倒装句。我们来学习这样的用法。好，要强调表示地方的副词或副词片语时，或者是主词它带有比较长的修饰语时，我们可以把地方副词或地方副词片语移到句首来做强调。那记得后面的主词和动词必须倒装。所以以句型来看，假设原本直述句的句型是主词加动词加地方副词或副词片语，倒装之后句型是地方副词或副词片语加上动词再加主词。好，句型里面这个动词其实常常会用 be 动词或者是用 come, go, sit, lie, stand, live 等等表示位置或状态的动词。那我们就要注意一下这个 sit, lie, stand 在这边不是指坐着、躺着、站着，而是指位于、坐落于的意思。例如 A vase filled with flowers sat on the table. 我们现在把地方副词片语 on the table 移到句首，然后把 sat 移到主词前方，形成倒装，句子会变成 On the table sat a vase filled with flowers. 桌上有个装满花朵的花瓶。好，另外，如果句型当中的主词是代名词，这时候就不用倒装咯。例如 Here she comes with the food， 她带着食物来这里。那例句里面主词是代名词 she， 所以不用倒装，这个词序就是 Here she comes， 而不是 Here comes she。 好，那以上今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天单字吧。
Frontier. The small town was located on the frontier, far from any cities. Mysterious. Mr. Blackwell recently received a mysterious letter with no return address. Harsh. After losing her job, Bridget had to face the harsh reality of her situation. Characterize. Dr. Burke's studies are characterized by long, complex sentences with lots of advanced words. Indigenous. The indigenous people of Australia have lived there for thousands of years. Resident. Gavin has been a resident of this city since he was a child. Ecosystem. Pollution can seriously damage the balance of an ecosystem.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I am Shane.
See you next time.